What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, we were very impressed with Suga Sean's performance last night, knocking out the bantamweight goat Aljamain Sterling, but there was one guy who just wasn't quite as impressed as we were, and that's Umar Nurmagomedov. He tweeted out in response to Sean saying that he's going to be one of the best fighters of all time by the time his career's over, and he said, look, there's nothing special about you. I guarantee you I finish you in 3 rounds. And in so many ways, I wish he hadn't gotten injured and that the Corey Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov fight had happened in Nashville, because if he were able to get past Corey, especially if he were able to finish him, we would be talking today about OMalley versus Nurmagomedov, but it's more along the lines of OMalley versus Vera right now. However, I do believe that fight materializes at some point. I think it happens in 2024. Do you agree with the up-and-comer Umar Nurmagomedov? Can he beat Sean O'Malley?
Well, there's no way of knowing if he would have beat Corey Sandhagen or not because we didn't get to see the fight, but I was strongly leaning towards Umar getting his hand raised in that fight. And then I believe the UFC would have placed him in the front row in Boston to see what happens between Aljo and Suga. Of course, Suga gets his hand raised last night, and now we're talking about him being the world champion. Immediately, not even 10 seconds after he gets his hand raised, we wonder what's next, right? Okay,
Yep.
well, it's not probably going to be Aljamain Sterling because he just got finished in the second round. He's going to need some time to settle in and relax and do some game planning. Also, his best friend, Merab Dvalishvili, has been waiting very patiently at the top of the bantamweight division for his friend to no longer be the champion so he can have his opportunity. So that sort of makes Aljamain Sterling, a little bit further down the list as far as people that are going to get the next shot. Now you've got the champ, Suga Sean, calling out Cheeto because he wants to avenge that one loss that, he still to this day doesn't believe he actually has on his record. But according to all, the Sure Dogs and all those places, Tapology, he does, in fact, have a loss on his record. I think that Umar Nurmagomedov could be the perfect guy to usher in for a #1 contenders matchup right now. And I think that anybody that knows these Russian fighters and this Team Khabib stable of fighters knows that these guys don't want easy fights. They want the hardest matchups they can possibly find. Rinse and repeat again and again and again. And even though he's saying that he saw nothing special about Sean, and even though he's trying to downplay what the now champ just did, Umar Nurmagomedov knows how dangerous of a fighter Suga Sean is, but he also knows how big of a challenge it is. And that's what I love about Umar and the rest of the guys that carry the last name Nurmagomedov and the rest of the guys that come out of Dagestan and Team Khabib. They want the hardest challenges. They want to go seek greatness, and they want to become the world champion. And I think that you might see a mega fight take place between Suga and Umar Nurmagomedov sooner than later.
Well, this is what I think happens. I think the UFC will make the Vera versus O'Malley fight. It makes sense. It's the one loss on O'Malley's record.
Yeah.
They want to get him back in there before the end of the year. That December card is the one that he wants to be on. There's a big storyline that they can build. And I also, quite frankly and candidly, think that the UFC thinks that Sean can beat Vera, and I would agree with them.
100%.
I think that Sean will win that fight, and then he will be able to move into another title defense sometime early to mid 2024, and that sets up perfectly for a #1 contenders fight, because if there's anybody on the UFC's roster that deserves a #1 contenders fight, it's the guy that patiently waited for his best friend to not be the champion anymore, and it's Merab Dvalishvili.
Right.
Corey Sandhagen versus Umar did not happen, unfortunately, and I don't think it's going to happen now because Corey injured his arm in that fight. He's going to need some time to recover. The UFC is not going to want to put a hot prospect with the last name Nurmagomedov on ice for another 4 to 6 months. They're going to look to get him in there. I think Merab is ready, and I think what they'll do is they're going to make Umar Nurmagomedov versus Merab Dvalishvili, and they're going to make Suga versus Cheeto, and the winner of those 2 fights is going to fight each other for the belt. And I think it's probably going to be Suga versus Umar, which is a great fight, because when you hear the last name Nurmagomedov and you see that the fighters out of Dagestan, it's like immediately you think grappler, because Khabib was potentially and arguably the best MMA grappler of all time. And so his cousin's got to be the same thing, right? Well, yes, he is. However, he can also strike to a level that even Khabib couldn't strike at.
Right.
He's got incredible kicks. He's got amazing range. He moves in and out very quickly. He's hard to read. He's hard to hit. And in his last fight, he showed us that he's got one-punch KO power. So I think that's a super difficult fight for O'Malley. I think it's a mega fight for the UFC, and I think they make it in 2024.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And I think Cheeto Vera is the perfect first title defense for Suga Sean. Remember remember, last night was the first time Sean had a 5-round fight in the UFC, and it didn't go all 5 rounds. So he doesn't have that experience of being a 5-round championship round fighter. And I think before you go in there against who I deem to be the absolute best fighters on the planet in Merab Dvalishvili and Umar Nurmagomedov, at bantamweight, of course, you need to have a little bit more experience. You need to be the main event a couple more times. You need to feel what it's like to carry a card on your back completely and totally. And I think Suga Sean versus Chito Vera gives him a good chance to do that. Chito Vera is a tough fighter. He's a great fighter. He actually has a win over Suga Sean. But it's better to go in there with the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? And I think Chito Vera and Suga Sean have felt each other, and Suga knows that he could beat Chito on any given night. Of course, things happen. The durability of his leg didn't hold up, and he ended up getting finished. But if Chito Vera goes in there in the title defense and has to deal with everything that Suga brings inside and outside of the cage, I think he'd be a little bit overwhelmed, and Suga would get his hand raised, which would line him up perfectly for the winner of Merab versus Umar. And I obviously am going to go with Umar to win that fight, even though it'd be probably a really tough fight. And stylistically, these two guys clash perfectly. I do happen to believe that Umar Nurmagomedov versus Suga Sean O'Malley could be a mega fight. And I think that if Umar can go in there and really shake things up and prove to us that he's better than Merab Dvalishvili, we're talking about an epic title fight.
Yeah, that's a mega main event.
Yeah.
That's a UFC fight week kind of main event that they would put on, which very rarely happens at the lower weight classes. 125 and 135, even 145 to some degree, until Max Holloway and Volkanovski really kind of set that division on fire. Those smaller weight classes were the co-main events, notoriously. Right. Sean O'Malley's not a co-main event fighter, which actually makes the December card kind of interesting, because Conor said he's fighting on that. And one thing we know, if O'Malley's not a co-main event fighter, Conor damn sure ain't a co-main event fighter.
That's right.
So it would be interesting, because O'Malley would be defending the title and Conor would be the main event for maybe the BMF title. Who knows if it's Gaethje or what happens.
They'll come up with something for
They'll
him.
figure something out for that. But the end of the year card, the last card of 2023, is going to be fun, no doubt. But I expect Suga to be on it, and I expect the opponent to be Chito. And I think all signs are pointing to this Nurmagomedov versus O'Malley fight in 2024. And if somehow Merab Dvalishvili can actually upset Nurmagomedov, because I do believe he'd be the underdog in that fight, what a great revenge story there, because it's, you beat my best friend Aljamain Sterling, but now I'm coming to, avenge that loss and defeat you. So any way you shake it, bantamweight's been one of the most fun divisions for a long time, and it looks like we got a lot more fun ahead of us.
Yeah, we've got storylines on storylines. So no matter who gets their hand raised in these next few fights, you've got a lot of great matchups. And one thing I'll say is Suga Sean better get some wrestling shoes and a singlet, because the next few title defenses seem like they're going to be wrestling heavy.
Yeah, no doubt.